even legal residents of the United States. The White House launching a new rule today forcing people to basically potentially pick between food and their working status, because this new rule punishes people who get government food support or health care with a tougher road to legal work, like a green card or citizenship. So think about it like this. Unlike the battles over people who broke a law to be here, now we're in a place where legal immigrants who are allowed to use these programs are basically being threatened with punishment, a rule designed to make the path to citizenship or legal status here in the United States more dependent on class and wealth. If that sounds a little funny, like, wait, is that what this whole project is about? Obviously, many critics tonight saying that approach undercuts the long-standing tradition in the U.S. immigration system that people come here for a better life.
Is that sentiment, give us your tired, your poor, still operative in the United States, or should those words come down? Should the plaque come down off the Statue of Liberty?
Well, I'm certainly not prepared to take anything down off the Statue of Liberty.
All righty then. Now that is on the legal side. As for the undocumented, Trump officials are back on defense over those large raids, which came literally days after what we all remember, what we all lived through here, one of the most horrific acts of anti-Latino violence in U.S. history.
Given the emotions of the country right now, in hindsight, do you wish this raid didn't happen this week?
The timing was unfortunate.
Unfortunate. Well, speaking of unfortunate, we now have the picture of Donald Trump's top border official confronted with this video. You may have seen it. We played it more than once here. A young girl scared and upset as she was stranded and separated from her father.
It's not just a victimless crime that's going on here. First of all, they are here illegally, and then a lot of times there's additional fraud that goes with this for them to try to get these jobs in these companies. So I understand that the girl's upset, and I get that. But her father committed a crime.
References to crimes with victims usually refer to violence or some sort of major financial harm, hence the other victims. Not a single person taking a low-paying job in concert with an American company. Now, the reference there to fraud is true as far as it goes, but that again would apply to these American companies who also fraudulently employ the undocumented. And they do it over and over. This is a market economy. These are companies with accountants and lawyers and executives who usually know better and who are also very rarely charged, let alone convicted. This would include the president's own company, which faces brand new allegations of employing, yes, undocumented workers. Now, there are about 8 million undocumented workers in the United States. That's about 5% of the U.S. workforce, with many companies going back and back and back to engage in this kind of commerce, this kind of employment law. Now, in the last year, I can tell you, we checked this tonight, the feds prosecuted 11 people for hiring undocumented workers. And they didn't prosecute on a wholesale basis any entire corporations. That is quite a contrast. So keep that in mind as you watch Trump officials who don't really have firm answers to this line of factual questioning.
It seems like you guys are turning a blind eye to this crime being committed by the president's own companies.
I take offense to say anybody's turning a blind eye to someone that is violating the law.
There's never been a raid. There's never been any sort of law enforcement investigation that we can discern.
Well, so you really can't say that for sure, because there are investigations going on all the time that you're unaware of.
I'm joined by Mara Gay, a member of the New York Times editorial board, Nancy Santiago, former Obama administration official and vice president of Hispanics and Philanthropy, and immigration attorney Lucero Ortiz, who's director of the legal services for the Central American Resource Center. Good to have all of you with us here as experts on these issues. I want to start with you, Nancy, on that contrast. What do you think of the Trump officials' defense that while there's very few corporations charged, maybe there's some secret investigation we don't know about?
Unless the secret investigation is including the Trump companies, and maybe that's why it's so secret. But the reality is that at the end of the day, it's the employer. So it seems to be okay to go after the workers in these places because they are performing illegally, but it seems not to be okay to go after the companies themselves for fraudulent and illegal behavior themselves. So it seems to be, again, back to the idea of class and economics, basically. The big concern that I have in all of this is we talk about the illegality of it, and the reality is that when the raids happened, they didn't happen in places where illegal activity happens. They're happening in workplaces. It tells you something about the immigrants that they are picking up and what they're here for. So that's the concern that I have. Unless they are willing to go deep into the pockets of some of the companies that are very much the Trump supporters, which I doubt they're going to do, maybe that's why it's so secret. But until now, 11 prosecutions don't tell me that they're doing any real work in that space.
Mara, take a listen on that point to Mr. Morgan, sort of on this same issue that seems to be a trouble spot for them.
Sure.
Are there any charges against the companies or the business owners?
It's a pending investigation right now.
In the last year, 0 companies prosecuted, only 11 individuals prosecuted. I mean, if you focused on the companies, wouldn't that have more of a deterring effect than going after these individuals who are desperate?
So Jake, again, this is the third time. That was the intent of the investigation.
But I'm talking about in the last year, only 0 companies and 11 individuals for the last year.
I can't speak to the Department of Justice on how many cases they have.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit painful for me to talk about policy here because I think this is about politics, and it is absolutely not. These are not policies being driven by reason. They're being driven, I believe, by the need and desire to throw red meat to Donald Trump's base, who unfortunately, it's like they forgot what their mother taught them, and they are responding to hatred against black and brown people. And I think we have a long history in this country of criminalizing African Americans and Latino people. And I think that that's what the administration is playing upon. And it's sad. I'm embarrassed as an American. And, you know, there's a real conversation to have, absolutely, about policies at the border. And I think the Democrats actually allow the Trump administration far too much space to operate on hate and fear when they don't offer an alternative vision for the country that is comprehensive. And so if they are not telling the story to the American people about how we can have safe, secure, and fair borders humanely, and with respect and human dignity, then they are allowing Donald Trump to fill that void with hate mongering and fear mongering at a time when hate crimes are on the rise and an election is on the horizon. And I think people really need to start talking about human rights and human dignity and where that fits into this conversation.
Lucero, how about you?
Yes, I think one thing that's really important to remember is that the immigrant community has been recruited to very dangerous sectors like the construction sector and the poultry industry, where they're often exploited and jobs are very dangerous. This is not by accident. This is very intentional. And one thing that's important to really take into account in Mississippi in particular and Louisiana, Central American communities and Asian immigrants rebuilt those areas after Katrina. And there was a very specific recruitment of immigrants where employers, many were able to employ these individuals and are not being prosecuted. So again, it really is about accountability, and it is about our economy as a whole that benefits on the backs of these individuals. Unfortunately, the only ones that carry the burden are the immigrants. And at this time, it is really important that we really look at all of the incidents that have happened in the last week in a much more historical lens. For the past 30 years, we have not had comprehensive immigration reform. Since 1986, we've seen the number of undocumented workers grow and the exploitation and fear in these communities grow as well. And so you see that the Latino community is often vilified and scapegoated in this arena, and again, through this historical lens. So when we're seeing these attacks, the raids in Mississippi, the shootings in El Paso, these all have a thorough lens that we need to look at them through, because again, this is inaction by Congress over 30 years. And now we have really the spark in the prairie fire, which is this president who is stoking the flames of hatred and really anti-immigrant sentiment that has led to what we've seen over the last week.
And what do you say to people who hear about this or hear about it at a distance and say, well, okay, a lot of people are suffering. A lot of poor people are in America. A lot of people are born here and have very little access to anything. And they ask, why should those public benefits be going to people who've come here?
One thing that's important is Cares in D.C. was one of 200,000 individuals who submitted public comments related to today's announcement of the federal rule on public charge. And one thing that's very important is that immigrants are the economic engine of this country in many ways and have been producing economically for generations. And so it is it's lopsided to say that immigrants are not contributing to the economy. Furthermore, immigrants, as the final rule suggests, immigrants are not using public benefits. Oftentimes, they are not eligible for those benefits. And so, again, this campaign and this final rule is really about stoking fear and really creating this otherness and fear of the other so that voters and other individuals who may not have enough information or who are really going to look at the politics as opposed to the policy issues will look to their immigrant neighbors and their immigrant brothers and sisters as the other, as competition in an economic environment when, again, these individuals are working in industries that are dangerous, that are often underpaid, and that do need to be regulated. And again, being immigrants in the United States does not allow them to take advantage of any of these public benefits.
Lucero Ortiz, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it. I turn back to the panel here in New York, and I wonder if we could build on that conversation, though, because I do think there's a lot of misunderstanding about it, Nancy. I mean, it seems that if you are here legally, right, there is a legal and illegal line, or undocumented.
That's right.
But if you're here legally, right, then in theory, we want the whole thing to work together. If you start going down the road of having a blatantly two-tiered, two-class system, right? This is a Stephen Miller idea that says, oh, well, we're going to let people in. Oh, they are here legally, whatever their race, although obviously I think panelists are right to say much of this targets Latinos. But whatever it is, now, okay, you can be here, but you have to be higher class to stay, or we're going to punish you otherwise. You're really going back to something that we haven't seen, at least since the '65 Immigration Act under written law, which is a two-tiered system.
That's right. And it's still about classism, right? This is still about how we know that the folks that are coming through that are immigrants that don't need benefits and they're here legally look a certain way. Let's be clear about what that is. And so this is yet another way. They were losing the argument about illegal immigrants, and they knew they were losing it. And most of Americans fear that if closing the doors to a path to legal immigration for folks is a mistake. So more and more of the American public was looking for that opportunity to a path towards immigration reform. As they start to lose that battle, they need to find something else to kind of stoke the flames. Right. And this is it. Now it's like, you're not going to get public benefits, but they don't ask for them.
And before we go, Mara, I did want to point out that there are reports in the Washington Post that the president is upset about aspects of what's been happening. Namely, he doesn't like it when people call him racist. President Trump considers himself, quote, a branding wizard, but he's vexed by a, quote, branding crisis of his own, how to shed the label of racist. And the Post writes he recoils from being called the R word, even though some of his actions and words have been, quote, plainly racist.
Well, a racist is as a racist does. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. He has routinely deployed racist language, racist practices since long before he was president of the United States. He seems more concerned about being called something that is offensive but is accurate than he does about actually doing something about racism. So I would, if I were sitting here in front of him, I would suggest that he, take a long, hard look in the mirror.
Yeah, and I've got to go, but I will just add that while the standards are low these days, treating a fundamental moral crisis as a branding crisis always a bad sign.
Well said.
Mara and Nancy, thanks to both of you for your expertise for kicking off our show tonight. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.